Hi, my name is John Brink. Thank you for joining us today. You're watching a history of the BC forest industry. My guest today is a very interesting guest. It's Frank Everitt. Frank has an interesting background. He was the president of the IWA, International Woodworkers of America, now the Steelworkers, but also Frank has been a three-term councilor of the city of Prince George. Morning, Frank.
Welcome and thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity.
So, tell me a little bit about your background. How long have you, or where were you born?
I was born in Saskatchewan, a little town called Spiritwood, just outside of North Battleford. And when I was 18 years old, I hitchhiked to Edmonton and then took a bus to Quesnel and went to work for Wellwood of Canada in 1971.
Why did you go to Quesnel and why did you go to the forest industry?
Well, I had a brother that lived in Quesnel, so that was a connection there, and he'd been out there for a number of years, an older brother, so I took the move there and went to work for Wellwood of Canada, like I said, and worked a whole week and got laid off.
Oh.
So then I went to Mackenzie to visit some relatives for Christmas and came back to pick up my check, and they said, "Where have you been? We've been trying to get a hold of you." I said, "Well, you laid me off," so I went off to Mackenzie.
Right.
So I went back to work and
at Wellwood.
At Wellwood. And
now Wellwood at that point, and that was when? What year was that?
1971.
1971. So Wellwood had then different operations, if I recall. They had a plywood plant, they had a sawmill. Did you work at the plywood plant, the sawmill, or then at 2 Mile Flat is where the planer mills used to be? So where did you work?
I worked at the planer mill. There was about 50 people working in that operation at that time.
Okay.
And the plywood plant and the sawmill were down on the river, as they used to have the river log ride that would come in there, and all the logs would come up the river.
They came still up the river then?
Yeah, at that time they did, yeah.
Yeah, but something unique, obviously, at that period.
Sure was.
And in 2 Mile Flat, there were quite a few mills, right? Quesnel was a booming lumber town. Quite a number of mills, right?
Yeah, it certainly was. Quesnel Forest Products was there, and Ernst Forest Products had 3 different operations on there, and West Fraser had their old Beaver sawmill as well, and the main sawmill down the road across from the planer mill.
Right. And then you were there, and what did you do? How long were you there, and what did you do after?
I was there for about 8 years, and then I took a job working for the IWA as a business agent here in Prince George, and looked after the Quesnel area and traveled back and forth to the office and looking after the membership along the way.
And the IWA stands for?
It was the International Woodworkers of America.
Right. And now it is become a different name, right?
Yeah, it's now called the Steelworkers. In 2004, there was a merger between the Steelworkers. For a period of time, we were the IWA Canada when we separated from the International in 1986, and then here in 2004, we joined with the Steelworkers. And a lot of jokes around that and a different thought process out in the public with that.
Yeah, because wood and steel are competitive, right? So
there's no doubt about it, and wood's good.
Wood is good, yeah. So the other part about it is so during that period, and the industry was then, as it has been for a long time, also in transition. You still had owners that operated and less so now, where most of the companies are larger companies and owners don't manage and managers don't own. But then you had all kinds of different characters in the industry.
Certainly, and that's an interesting characterization of it too, because they were entrepreneurs and characters. They had built their operations with their mindset in it. In Quesnel, we had Ernst Forest Products, and he was an interesting gentleman to have worked for. And here in Prince George, we had Bill Cordoban, who had portable mills all over the place, and everybody thought, what do you do about portable mills? And he was producing as much in the portable mills as some people were producing with the stand mills built in a community.
Exactly. He was a bit of a pioneer in that area, right?
Yeah, he was a pioneer and an entrepreneur in my mind.
Yeah, and then from that point forward, things started to kind of consolidate more and more, right?
Certainly did. I mean, there was consolidation of our name changes where places were bought out by others. And as an example, Canfor went to Slocan Forest Products to buy them out. And Ike Barber said, no way, that's not going to happen. And he sold all of his chips to Weyerhaeuser for a number of years to make sure that he could finance his operations.
Right.
It took Canfor another, I'd say, 10 years before they were able to make that deal.
Right.
And then we had the consolidation of Northwood. Everybody was wondering whether it was going to be Northwood that bought Canfor out or Canfor bought Northwood out. So
Right.
in the end, Canfor was the one that maintained it.
And so then during all those transitions, there you had all the way going back to the 50s where there were maybe 500 mills around the Prince George area, and some people claim there were even more than that. To go through the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, and all of a sudden through all the consolidations, I have a hard time finding more than 5 different mills in the areas or combination of ownerships in the region. It's so dominated by so few.
Yeah, the consolidation produced less companies around, and a number of mills were swallowed up and closed down in that process.
Right, and then but even from the labor perspective, are you? Not the question I was going to ask you is that you were involved for a long time with the IWA, then the steelworkers, for nearly 40 years, was it?
Yeah, just about 40 years, yeah.
40 years, and all the changes that you would have seen during that period must have been amazing.
Well, it certainly was, because I mean, when we first started out, we were dealing with issues between employers and the membership,
Right.
and trying to sort those out. And then we got into where the government made some changes and wanted to have more parks, and they wanted to have this 12% of the land base in parks. So we went through all of that discussion. And then there was the issue of how we were going to deal with the land base so that we had a firm number of hectares or acres that would be used for timber harvesting and riparian zones and where animals would be along the way. So that worked, in my mind, very well in the Caribou and in the Kootenays. To a lesser degree, we did it up in Fort Nelson and that rounding area and down into Fort St. John. But it took away from it brought a different idea or a different focus for the union to deal with, because we were looking after our members' well-being, but in a different area than just the day-to-day issues that were on the floor.
Yeah, so the whole strategy of the union really changed in terms of not only doing labor negotiations and resolving day-to-day issues, but also in terms of the longer-term viability for the membership to have jobs and for the industry to be viable, because all of a sudden you become, as an organization, through your membership, a major stakeholder in the well-being of the industry.
Yeah, and I think the local union in Prince George area, where it's headquartered, and the one in Williams Lake, were part and parcel of that kind of a discussion that there's a need for us to do this particular thing for the long term of our industry and for our members.
Yeah, and then you took on a different role within the union. You became the president of the North, really so you had then the coast, and then from Hope North, you pretty much were in charge of all of that.
From Clinton was part of the area that was all in the Caribou and interior, and then there was a separation of the locals in 1977, and we had from Marguerite, I guess it would be the Marguerite Ferry, where it used to run across, all the way to Fort Nelson, out to McBride, and out to Smithers.
Right.
And so a pretty big land base, and at that time there was a lot of mills along the road as you went east, west, or north.
busy job
Busy job.
because
Big-
every day is something.
Big responsibility.
Yeah, and a big responsibility, a huge responsibility, right? And then the other thing that I remember, there was, the industry had certain characters, but so did you as an organization. I remember Jack Monroe was usually very dominant in the news, very outspoken about different things and different ideas, and was fairly dominant.
You know about it, Jack was a well-spoken man. He understood the industry, and he knew how to negotiate, and we did very well as a union in that time. In the 80s, we got 81, I think it was, we got a 13 and a 15% increase.
Wow.
And we went on strike for a little while because there was 12 and 14% on the table. So we got 1 more percent in each year.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
But when Jack said, this is what we're going to do, he had a good following, and he brought good results for the membership.
Right. And so then kind of looking at more to the current situation, obviously what we have is what people have referred to as a perfect storm. So, in the last number of years where the market 2 years ago took a nosedive very quickly, where very quick mills shut down for a period of time to wait for the market to come back. Costs were too high, and we ended up with short-term closures, but also the other problem that occurred was the pine beetle pandemic, combined with the spruce beetle, which substantially reduced the annual allowable cut, resulting in having too much capacity, not enough timber.
Yeah, and certainly along with the epidemic of the pine beetle, we rushed to try and salvage what wood we could out of that, and the government of the day said go harvest in those areas to get that done. And then subsequently we had fires after that. So we've got all 3 of those things coming up against it. And I don't think we've seen the last of the spruce bug as well. I think that's going to have some detrimental effect on our green timber out there.
Right. Now, obviously, the uncertainty, and particularly in communities that had major shuts or not many mills operating, is Mackenzie is a good example of that. Fort St. James, is devastating, obviously, to the membership of the union, but also to the community as a whole and all the other people that rely on the services provided to these mills.
Well, there's no doubt about that, John. When you have a mill on curtailment or a shutdown, it doesn't just affect the members that work in that operation, it affects everything within that community. And communities live by the forest industry in Mackenzie and Fort St. James and Quesnel and Williams Lake, Vavenby for sure. All of those communities had a good employer in there and had good wages coming out of it, and then all of a sudden for that to disappear, it's terrible for folks to try and rationalize. And what do they do? Because you've got a home you can't sell, and you don't want to sell it, and you've got to earn a living for your family. So you're subject to leaving and trying to find a job where you can come back and forth, or you make the hard decision to move on from the forest industry, and that's sad.
That is devastating, right? Yes. And especially, kind of looking forward, I'm trying always to be optimistic. I believe there is a great future in the industry, but that being said, in reality, we may still see some further curtailment potentially.
That's a possibility. I mean, the key now is, when we go forward, is how do we go forward? What do we do with the timber that we've got? Once the annual allowable cut is established, here's what we got to work with, and what kind of products can we use to make a living from the forest industry. Right. And there's been some change. The value-added industry has brought bioenergy. We've got cross-laminated timber.
CLT, yeah.
Yeah, that's a new thing that's being pushed forward. And we've got some changes to the building code that allows us to build in the province 12-story buildings. Never did we think that we were going to be able to build more than 3 or 4 stories of wood. And the cross-laminated timbers can be put up in a way faster. An example here in town is where you look at the Hyatt Hotel. They came in and just put one floor on at a time with the...
It's modules.
Yes.
Right. I was amazed actually how quickly that happened, but it's certainly an indication of what the future will look like in terms of building, structures like that, right? So yeah. So,
they started this past year, and they're going to open in March.
yeah.
And you're going to have a hotel open in that short a time. It's amazing.
Yeah, and then just coming back to some of the other ones that in the forest industry that have happened. Obviously because of the pine beetle and the spruce beetle, our annual allowable cut used to run at about 65 million cubic meters annually, and then it was lifted up to as high as 80, and then may go down as low as 40. And now what we are trying to do is match capacity to availability of timber.
Yeah, and that's the struggle that's going on right now, is if you have to make that tough decision to close an operation, how do you do that and where do you do that as a company? Because as we said earlier, they're large companies, so they got a number of operations, and wood can move anywhere to those operations. Once you put it on a truck, it's incremental to the rest of the timber that's in the area.
Yeah, and from the government's perspective is that there is obviously a lot of pressure on government, that why are we, why can't we not reduce the cost of stumpage? And obviously that is directly connected to potentially duties.
Yeah, there's a real chance that if the government was to make changes to the stumpage, that we'd have worse countervail duties put on by the Americans. And we're now in a position where those are going to make changes in August, so the stumpage is going to go down considerable, and hopefully that allows the industry to make a dollar and reinvest back in it to keep their operations going. We understand that there will be some more rationalization, but we're hopeful that those communities are able to still maintain employment, because if we close up all kinds of communities because it's easier to do it in the super mills, that's not good for those communities.
No, and and then kind of looking at the forest land base, I believe it is we have something like 22 million cubic hectares as the working forest in British Columbia, and looking at some of other places like Sweden, for instance, are harvesting substantially more cubic meters per hectare than we are, although the general conditions, weather conditions in all of its species are somewhat similar than us. There is, looking forward, more potential in doing more intensive forest work on the land base, I believe.
I agree with that. I think that there's an opportunity for us to thin our forests rather than go in and clear cut. If we thin, we can be able to take the small out. We'll give space for trees to grow because they need a certain amount of, and when we have natural rejuvenation, there's no spacing of the trees. When we plant, then we can put some space in between trees so they can grow properly. But it's about managing the land base that we got and utilizing the fiber that grows on that to do things that not necessarily take this size of a log, but when we're thinning it could use that for other stuff.
And then the other part, Frank, that I believe is so important, and as we look forward, and especially from your perspective, having been involved representing labor so much for so many years, is that I don't think there is any question in anybody's mind that in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the industry will change in terms of the markets they serve, the products they develop, and they have to find new products for new markets. They have to extract more economic value, social and economic value from the resource, and my concern and others are that we have the skill sets that will man those particular positions because the industry will be totally different, equipment will be different in the next 5, 10, 20 years, and if not, what do we do about it?
Well, there's no doubt that we'll have different equipment in there if we're going to do different products. So people will have to be trained for it, as simple as that. I mean, they're not going to come with the skill sets that the employer will need at that day. And we've done that over time. I mean, technological change has moved across the forest industry in a rapid thing from the early 70s, where new technology came in place and people had to learn that. But it's about training for the future. It's about having products for the future. And all of those things will take a change in the thinking on what we do.
Right. So now what we are is, and hopefully that will start to change once there are adjustments to the stumpage system and hopefully duties. We are one of the highest cost producers in the world. We have to come back to being no less than average and then develop new techniques, extract more value from the resource. But my concern would be is that what we should be doing is developing the facilities to train those people already in those opportunities. So I've been, looking at the opportunity and developing a center of excellence that is attached to both the College of New Caledonia and UNBC, and developing research and development for new products, for new markets, new skill sets, new equipment and techniques, so that we again become a center of people come from far and wide to watch what we are doing, how we are doing it.
Excellent idea, I think. Here's where the bulk of the forest industry is harvested. So if we can have research and development. Years ago, all of the companies had or were part of research and development with dollars that they put in, or else they had their own department. Canfor used to make the panels for inside cars years ago down in the Lower Mainland.
Yeah.
And they had a research department. McMillan and Bodell in those days had research departments. And we've got an excellent university here and a college, so those things work very well in my mind. It's just about getting the dollars generated to them by the government and government and industry to do the research for new products.
And do it in particular in the region here, like the center of the province, and the spruce capital of the world, to not only do it but also in how do we grow more effectively, more volume per hectare, but all the way from there to creating entrepreneurship, developing new products for new markets, and operating techniques and equipment that is unique, for us as a province. Not unsimilar to what happened in Sweden about 25 years ago. They reinvented the industry there for all intents and purposes.
And when you're at a crossroads, you have to make those decisions. We don't make those decisions unless we have to. We're at that stage where we have to make the decisions, and that's to look at different products and what can we do to make sure the communities survive and people are able to earn a good living in them.
Yeah, and I agree with that. So the other thing I want to talk to you a little bit about is there all of a sudden Frank, when at the time that he was going to retire, started a whole new career as a councilor of the city of Prince George. And I'm excited about Prince George because I lived there for 55 years and seeing all the things happening. Tell us a little bit about the city of Prince George.
Well, I had been, courted is the right word, to be a city councilor for a number of years, and I'd always push back on it. Don't have time for that. And someone just said, well, when do you think you might have time? It'll be too late by that time when you change your mind. So sure, okay, I'll do it. So we put together a group that worked very hard and got me successful the first time around. And I really enjoy being a part of the community. I was active in the community prior to that, but you're a lot closer to the decision making and the responsibleness that comes from council. You've got a fairly large budget to work with, and the taxpayer always wants to know that they're getting full value for their money. And I think we've done a good job of going out there and working in the community and reconnecting with the community. There was a period of time where people thought that we made all our decisions at City Hall and we just implemented them and people could like them or not like them. And I think we've changed that there. With Mayor Hall, we've went out and reconnected in the community, and we try and do that every other year, or every year except for election year, because people wouldn't think that was too good. And we've done I think, a good job of putting the conditions in place for entrepreneurs to come to Prince George, and building permits have shown that people have invested well in Prince George, and not just, it's not commercial investments, it's individuals putting commercial investments into the thing. So it's good for Prince George. We've got record building.
Yeah, and then if I look back to the mid-60s when I first came here, it was a boom town. 2 questions that I ask. How long or when did you get here, and when are you leaving? Yeah, now it's different because now it's a community that is still competitive in terms of, although prices of houses are going up, but it's still a fantastic place to live. Takes probably 20 minutes to drive to work wherever you are, and a great community to raise a family with the University of Northern British Columbia, the College of New Caledonia, and all the infrastructure that we are building right now. It's an amazing city, and I think it was identified as one of the 10 most favorable cities in British Columbia, if not in Western Canada.
No, I think we got a great label out of that, that we're a place that you should want to come and live here. And people that live in Prince George are saying, I'll retire here, not that I'm going to leave. And we went through a process where everybody was packing up as they got a certain age. And now we're looking at, we need more senior housing. We need those rancher-style houses, so there isn't stairs for people to climb up and down. So it's a great city to be in.
Yeah, I agree. Frank, thank you very much for being my guest.
You're welcome.
Thank you for watching a history of the BC forest industry, and stay tuned to watch next week for our next session.